Okay, so we're live.
Welcome everyone to our Heritage Advisory Committee meeting for Tuesday, June the 20th. We're going to begin with our land acknowledgement statement. At the town of New Tecumseh, we acknowledge that we are on the treaty lands and traditional territory of the Anishinaabe peoples, specifically the Ojibwe, Chippewa, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. This land is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. New Tecumseh is covered by the Lake Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty No. 18th, signed on October 17th, 1818 with the Chippewa Nation. We acknowledge that we are all treaty people, and accept our responsibility to honor all our relations and move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and respect. Let's begin with the confirmation of the agenda. Everyone had a chance to look it over. Are there any additions or anything that anyone would like to say? No? All right. So can I get a motion to accept the agenda? Thank you, Lainey. Thank you, Allison. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, the request to speak. We do not have any members of the public wishing to speak tonight. Summary report. So the summary report was circulated, the one from April 11th, 2023. Are there any items on the summary report that anybody would like to call attention to or discuss? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 2, deputations and presentations. And we have Madeline Gibson, the senior planner for the town, regarding urban design guidelines. The floor is yours, Madeline.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Madeline Gibson. I'm a senior planner with the town of New Tecumseh, and I'm going to do a short presentation on an important project that we're doing, which is our review of our urban design guidelines. I'm making a presentation to all of our town committees just because there's such great expertise in some of these niche focus areas, and I want you all to be aware and also have an opportunity to make specific comments related specifically to this committee on heritage. So I will just share my screen. Well, I'll just get carried. Can I get permission to share my screen?
Certainly. Just give me 1 second here.
Yeah, no problem.
Madeline. There you go.
Thank you. Okay. So the town is undertaking a review of our current urban design guidelines. Some of you may be aware of this project, but for those of you who are not, the project started back in September. The town put out an RFP for consulting services, and we were lucky enough to be awarding the project to DTAH. They are a very prestigious urban design consulting firm based out of Toronto. They work all over Ontario in several different size communities and are very good at what they do and have won several awards. So the project initiation started back in September and it started with phase 1. So phase 1 went from September to December and really included an ability for our consultants to get familiar with our community. This required a project initiation, a lot of background information and research. They collected and then analyzed a lot of our existing documents, our official plan, our engineering standards. We also did site visits to all 3 communities, looking at existing development, historic development, heritage development, and proposed new development, ranging from commercial to residential to industrial and institutional. The consultants then presented a SWOT analysis, which is a strength, weakness, opportunity, and threats analysis, which really goes over, what's working really well for our town right now as far as urban design goes, and where can we have room for improvement, and how can the new urban design guidelines tackle some of the issues we might be dealing with. We also did a public information session in December, and we have an internal project working group where we get all the internal departments together to look at different aspects of the project. So in the original project initiation, we looked at identifying some of the key gaps in our urban design guidelines right now and in the urban design of our communities. And then the consultants went back to develop a list of principles, which brings us to phase 2 of the project, which is our education awareness campaign. We know that the town is about to grow significantly over the next few decades, and we want to be prepared with our community to ensure that we're building neighborhoods that are able to thrive, are sustainable, and will be successful throughout that growth and be able to manage that growth. That's why it's a great time to do our urban design guidelines, because urban design affects the way that we live our day-to-day lives within our neighborhoods, and it's really important to ensure and support great community building. So as part of our education awareness campaign, we have been going out to the public and doing information sessions, as well as meeting with town committees. We've had a working session back in March with council, and we've had some formal public information sessions as well back in March. And today I'm going to be presenting to you the draft principles that our consultants have come up with that were fed out of their background analysis. Moving forward into the future, and we're sort of entering this phase already, the consultants will be working on the development of the draft guidelines. So what we hear today, any comments or feedbacks that you might have, I'll send those directly to our consultants, and they'll be able to incorporate it into the urban design guidelines. So what are urban design guidelines? Urban design guidelines are an illustrated document used by the development community, town departments, and the public to ensure that all future private and public development, including neighborhoods, homes, commercial, industrial properties, landscape spaces, streetscapes, and more, respond to the local context and character of the town while incorporating innovative ideas and best practices. The process to create the urban design guidelines is what I explained earlier. It's 3 phases, and the project is currently on track to finish and wrap up in December, where we hope to take the final guidelines to council for final approval. Now, the organization of the guidelines is really important. That's how the document's going to be laid out. And the consultant has put this together to solicit any feedback, whether we think it's appropriately laid out and how it will be applied. So, of course, the guidelines will include an introduction. It will identify how we have a jurisdictional control over urban design, what that looks like, the policy support that's there for us to apply urban design guidelines. Then it looks at the context of our community. Obviously, we have 3 urban centers and a large rural area, and there's a lot that goes with that. So the context there will explain how the urban design guidelines will apply to the many different land use features in those communities. Further, we have our community design. That's a high-level urban design approach on how we design our communities at large, be it from greenfield development, which is lands that currently have no development on them, but are subject to be urbanized, as well as redevelopment sites throughout the town, infill sites, which I think would be most pertinent to this committee, and how infill sites might contribute to the existence of our mature neighborhoods. And then we also have things like how we can function and connect with our community members, either through transit or active transportation or through pedestrian connectivity, trails, that sort of thing. Site design would be the next part of the document. So site design is specific to each property, its orientation of buildings, its massing of buildings. It's how the buildings are connected to its neighboring community, its landscaping, all that good stuff. Finally, we'll go into building design, which is very specific on how buildings should be orientated as far as their relationship with the street or the relationship with any open space or the buildings adjacent to them. Again, it speaks to scale and massing to ensure that any new buildings are appropriate within their context. And then finally, we have implementation. So implementation is a really important component of the urban design guidelines. It will identify how these guidelines will be applied on the ground, and also will identify different references to other town documents that are very important and provide design direction, such as our Beaton Heritage Conservation District. So I just wanted to lay out here for you all the key principles that the consultant has proposed, and would love to hear any feedback along the way. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I can't see everyone right now, so please just turn on your mic and ask away. There will be a time for questions at the end as well. So for the principles, we have the consultant who's identified that community structure and identity is an important principle for the urban design guidelines, and will definitely provide some concrete direction on how we grow and what we want our communities to look like. Parks, trails, and open spaces, again, is a really important component of our communities. And if they're not properly designed or properly integrated into communities, then they're not as successful. So we want to be sure that any spaces that we create are optimal, accessible, equitable, and thriving. Then we've got street network design. That's all about connectivity and how our neighborhood can connect with each other throughout the community, but also within the community as we connect with other urban areas as well. And that's really about supporting different modes of transportation on different levels throughout our neighborhoods. We've got block design, which is an important component on how we set up, especially our residential areas, making sure that we are fostering those active transportation connections, the social interactions within our neighborhoods, and building a platform and foundation for a thriving community. Complete street design. This is a high-level direction that the urban design guidelines seek to provide. The complete street design is all about creating right-of-ways that are environmentally friendly, that consider tree canopy, shade, urban heat island effect, as well as incorporating multimodal transportation, so pedestrian, cycling, and obviously our single occupancy vehicle, and being sure that that street is designed in the most efficient and tactile way we can. This will, of course, feed into more detailed standards and guidelines that our engineering department will be working on. We've got contextual considerations. So we want to be sure that we're looking at the context, the geography and topography, the lay of the land, but also what's existing there now, and making sure that anything that we are providing direction on as far as urban design goes is really sympathetic to the existing mature neighborhood context, as well as supporting the growth that needs to happen. Just going to, whoops. Sorry about this. I just need to, there we go. So we're moving on to building placement orientation. I think everybody here in this committee is aware that building placement orientation can have a really big impact about the relationship with buildings to the street, relationship between buildings and pedestrians on the street, and how it feels to someone who's using that building or walking by that building. So this is really important as well. There's environmental components to building placement and orientation. We've got adjacent relationships. So again, about the scale and massing of buildings to be sure that any infill development or greenfield development is appropriately done to the scale and mass of the surrounding existing neighborhood. Heritage, which I think is the most pertinent to this committee, that is a guiding principle. We understand that there are many different heritage buildings in our community. We have a heritage conservation district, so we need to be aware of the implications of that, but we also want to support the survival and conservation of these buildings and some of these features. Environmentally friendly, so we want to provide direction on delivering environmentally friendly components like bird friendly, green roofs. It's really set up the design aspects of a development to be able to incorporate these things easy or make it an inherent part of the design that's more of a common sense approach. Site circulation and parking, of course, we know that the visual impacts of parking and vehicular movement can degrade the urban design of a community. It's a necessary evil to have, obviously, different modes of transportation that are around, but we can design our sites to make them more pedestrian friendly, more community friendly, rather than strictly orientated directly to our single occupancy vehicles. Landscape design is another principle. This is a big one. So making sure that sites are designed with proper landscape design. So this can address many different aspects on the property, be it environmental, addressing the urban heat island, but also providing habitat, space for biodiversity to thrive. There's also a mental health connection between landscape design and how you're associating yourself within your home and outside your home to the environment around you. So that's an important component and a principle that our consultants have proposed. And then the last two would be loading, servicing, and utilities. That's just being sure that we're not compromising that relationship between the building and the street and how people connect by relocating some of those loading, servicing, and utilities sort of out of sight or out of way. And then we've got signages. That's an important component. I think we find signs to be something that pops up a lot as far as design goes. So we want to be sure that not only are we supporting good quality signage that feeds the proper character of the neighborhood, but we also wayfinding to ensure that when people come or when we have existing residents who are looking for specific things or connections to trails, we have that built into our community already. So I wanted to speak a little bit more about heritage, which I think this committee is most interested about, and the guiding principle. So the guiding principle for heritage is to ensure that the cultural significance of heritage resources are maintained throughout time. And that's talking about appropriate scale and massing, respective adaptive reuse opportunities and site context. Of course, we do have the Beaton Heritage Conservation District, which I will get into a little bit later. But for those areas that have heritage significance, those buildings that are listed or designated, of course, over time, there's going to be opportunities where infill development might take place or adaptive reuse development might take place. And we want to be sure that we are being sympathetic to the existing heritage components that are either on site or adjacent to a developing site. When it comes to infill, the urban design guideline principles are going to be directing infill development in a way that we are not imitating heritage when it's a new building. We're not trying to recreate a moment in time with a new building. That's from the past. Often when we try to do those two things in new buildings, it actually does a disservice to the existing heritage features, and it does take away from those. What we want to be sure that we're doing is appropriate scale and massing. So building height, building orientation, and the feeling that you have on the street as a pedestrian when you look at these two buildings side by side, that one is not overtaking or overshadowing some of those important heritage aspects. So that's the most appropriate and important component of the urban design guidelines when it comes to infill development, which we will see quite a bit of. And then there's, of course, any project that might deal with adaptive reuse of existing heritage buildings. Certainly, an example of adaptive reuse is the administration building that is reusing an existing building that does have a community component to it. It was obviously a school at one point, and many people have memories there. But adaptive reuse, we want to be sure is sympathetic. So there could be architectural features that we're dealing with. For example, if there was an adaptive reuse project to the Gibson Center, obviously the architecture of the Gibson Center and the heritage and history of the Gibson Center, we want to be respected. But of course, any new additions can be their own as long as they're designed appropriately and sympathetically to those heritage components. And then, of course, site context as well. So that's just being sure that we're aware of the surrounding neighboring heritage context. And again, we're being sympathetic to that. Now, how the urban design guidelines will work with the Beaton Heritage Conservation District. The Beaton Heritage Conservation District really are design guidelines on their own. They do take an element of design direction, which identifies how people can do major works to their building on the exterior, how they will do additions. The urban design guidelines will likely say very similar things, even for our greenfield development that you would find in some of these older communities. The urban design guidelines, however, will not speak directly to the Beaton Heritage Conservation District because it's already protected under the Ontario Heritage Act and already has that design direction. The Beaton Heritage Conservation District is also deeply tied with our zoning bylaw. So the urban design guidelines may provide some high-level direction to perhaps an infill site or proposal, but the Beaton Heritage Conservation District will still be the main document that will drive development within that area. So that's the end of my presentation, and I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. So first, does the committee feel that we might have missed anything when it comes to our guiding principles? And then second, are there certain guiding principles that we should have more of a focus on, or do you believe that there's certain guiding principles that perhaps are not as important? And I'll open the floor up to anyone who'd like to offer any comments or feedback.
May I, I'll offer, Madeline, thank you again. It's nice. I haven't heard you speak to the presentation. I attended one of the public forums and saw some of the renderings and guiding principles, posted, but it was lovely to hear you explain it all in greater detail. So thank you again. I think, I don't know if it's greater than what's already going on, but I definitely know that there's some synergy between the multimodal transportation plan and then how it's fitting into urban design and then the parking master plan. Like there's so much about how the humans are moving around through the town. So it's nice to see that it's the component of that is making its way into all of the different design plans that are occurring and that seem to have some crossover and some synergy. Nothing to do with heritage per se, but just wanted to call that out. It's nice that that's very evident, because I think it is and will continue to be really quite important.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And there is a connection, I think, between heritage and that complete streets component or the connectivity component, because heritage streets are even set up in a very specific way, and the relationship between the building and the street is very specific. And over time, I think what we've come to realize is those types of urban setups do foster greater social interaction and more of an opportunity for community building. So you might see that start to pop up in new greenfield design as we move forward into the future. So it's a great connection there.
I would just like to say as well, also coming from England, we have quite a history of reusing and repurposing heritage. And sometimes that can really, really work, especially when you're going into an old bank and it's a Starbucks. So I really like that idea. I don't think that is disrespectful to heritage. I think that if it's done appropriately and I think your guidelines are quite sufficient. I can't think of anything. I was reviewing my notes, but I can't really think of anything to add to that. But yeah, I just like to say that the reusing is when it's done appropriately, it can be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the guidelines can provide the appropriate high level direction and foster the necessary discussion that would need to have on those types of projects to be sure that they are done correctly. Yeah, go ahead.
I just made a note here. Madeline, thank you for your presentation. That was really great. I'm just curious, you'd mentioned somewhere in there about the infill development, that in cases where it's tried to match sort of existing styles or existing heritage, that hasn't usually been done successfully. Wondering maybe about more information for that. Like, my immediate concern is, for future potential heritage districts, if we're having this sort of infill with a very modern building, for example, that's happened very recently in the neighborhood here, there's a lot of concern from the residents here of how that changes. It's very popular that people walk this area because of the heritage feel, even though it's not a designated district. And those very modern homes going in did sort of raise, I think, hopefully for Heritage Committee, some good sort of red flags of people going, oh, this is why maybe we really need to get on this, because it really does change the streetscape and the possibility of like filming movies and that sort of thing. Just wondering, maybe perhaps not today, but just if we could get more information on that sort of history of where that hasn't been done successfully and why, I think that might be helpful for us moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can touch on this a little bit more. I will say that I will come back to this committee when we have our draft guidelines to kind of give you guys an opportunity to see where some of these principles go. In the context where we have an existing mature neighborhood that doesn't have protection under the Ontario Heritage Act, like a heritage conservation district, but we are dealing with buildings that have heritage components that may or may not be listed or designated. From an urban design point of view, unfortunately, without that legal protection, there's not much that we can do with those homes if they're not listed or designated to keep them looking exactly the same. So we can foresee, especially trying to accommodate all the growth that we're going to get, the additional density, and there's many different infill opportunities. So whether that's laneway homes or sort of remodifying homes to duplexes, or even just, people severing larger sort of historical lots to add another residential lot for another single detached home. There's many different opportunities there for infill. What we would be most engaged with when it comes to applying the urban design guidelines is being sure that, number one, like you said, the street setup and the association with things like where the common front wall is along that street, that's not being sacrificed, because that has a design and relationship component that we don't want to lose because we know it's successful. And then when you're looking at, say, for example, an infill opportunity where it's on a vacant lot, but say going between two heritage homes that could be listed or designated, what we can do is, if there is a designation, obviously there are certain aspects of the home that will have that designation. And we can ensure that there's policies or directions to be very sympathetic to whatever it is that is specifically designated. But even just listed homes, what we want to be sure is happening is it's not necessarily, and you might see this in larger mature neighborhoods where there is a lot of heritage buildings of the same style. We don't necessarily require or want to require that someone emulates that existing style perfectly, because it can come out looking like a caricature almost, something that's very disingenuous. Someone could propose a quite modern building, but when they get it wrong is when the association between the street and the neighboring properties is out of whack. So either the building is way too big, the setbacks are not appropriate, the massing of the building, so how the building relates to its neighboring buildings is completely off, and the scale is not there. That's a big way we can get it wrong. But if we can use our urban design guidelines to ensure that there's guidelines to create an opportunity to insert like a modern building within a heritage component that doesn't take away from the existing neighborhood, take away from the neighboring buildings, but almost is complementary to, that's when we can get it really right. So these guidelines will set out that parameter. So unfortunately, without that legal protection of a heritage conservation district, we can't be so specific in what we ask for. But when you develop a heritage conservation district, and Vanessa and Katie will know this, that there is very specific criteria as to what can become a heritage conservation district. Certain infill developments don't necessarily detract from that unless it's a large swath of properties that have been changed over and all of a sudden that connection is lost. So there's still obviously opportunities in many circumstances where a heritage conservation districts can still be included, even if there are a couple infill design happening in the neighborhood. But certainly what I can do is I can put together, when I present next, is some examples of what that sympathetic infill development looks like. And then perhaps even bring a picture of where it maybe has gone wrong. And we can see that even with communities that have tried to recreate like farmhouse style greenfield neighborhoods, that doesn't translate the same way that it does when those buildings were originally built in the mature communities that exist today. So it almost is less sympathetic to the heritage building.
Thank you, Madeline. If members of the committee have examples that they like of infill housing, can we pass those on to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I can think of two examples. One is in Cabbagetown, which is a heritage district, and the other is in Schaumburg, and both of them are new builds, but that fit in. And I think one of the challenges is that both of those are very high quality build, and that is not something that we can control so much. We can't say,
Yes, certainly.
yeah. So that's part of the challenge is to encourage that investment in our community. And how do we entice people to build these beautiful, long-lasting buildings that, you know, as you said, fit in and aren't necessarily trying to mimic, but in some way make reference to the heritage. A good example in our community, I would say, is the Beaton Library. It fits in quite well with the community. It has some of the elements of the town hall beside it reflected in the building, but it's quite obviously a new building without trying to look old-fashioned-y, which is not a word, but now it is. All right, did anyone else have any questions for Madison? Okay, now we have two. Go ahead.
Lainey, you can go
Erica.
ahead.
Thank
Finish
you.
your thoughts on it.
Sorry. It raises a really good point about this talking about scale. So I appreciate that that's in there because it has become a pattern with people adding additions, even to buildings that aren't designated. I wonder if that's something that committee could consider. I know we didn't used to receive the demolition applications. I don't know if that's something that we wanted to consider, maybe looking at addition applications as well, just until this process is complete. I don't know if anybody else has seen this, but there are whopper garage additions going on that are larger than the existing houses, and it's really distracting from the original structures, whether they're designated or not. I'm not sure if that's something that committee can do or that anyone else is interested in, but just in the meantime, it sounds like this is going to be a little while before this reaches implementation. Just a thought.
My question was also related to scale, so I think we were still thinking similar lines. Because I guess, Madeline, you were saying that, you know, we only have certain guidelines over what we can tell people that a building needs to look like. But I want to just make sure, but we can have guidelines as to size and scale of the buildings on the properties. Because I know, for example, York Regions had a huge issue over the last 10 years of these monster homes coming into older neighborhoods. And really, I live not a heritage neighborhood, but definitely an established neighborhood, 50 years old this year. And it's all little houses, we're not big. If something giant and monstrous came on, it would definitely kind of change the fabric of the neighborhood. And I would hate to see that. And then, you know, even where there are bylaws or zoning, some of these places, again, New York Region's the example I know of, they don't get the proper repercussions for when they avoid the laws. They're just allowed to say, oh, here's a fine or something. And then you have these big monster homes built this close to the neighbor's property, kind of ruining things. So whether it's a heritage neighborhood or just a slightly older neighborhood like mine, I just want to make sure that that's kind of addressed, because I could see that definitely creeping its way this direction if it's already a big problem down there.
So that's a great question. I will say, so we have a zoning bylaw in place right now, and that depicts what you can build and how big you can build, lot coverage, building height, that sort of thing. So any development is required to stay within the applicable zoning. But the specific controls that you might be looking for, the urban design guidelines, they are just guidelines. They are not a law. So we can only go so far. But any specific components, I mean, the Beaton Heritage Conservation District adds that other layer to those neighborhoods that are heritage focused. So that could be a direction that the community wants to go in the future if they want to safeguard certain neighborhoods from that kind of thing. But the zoning bylaw and the urban design guidelines will work hand in hand. So there could be some minor suggested changes to the zoning bylaw, but I don't foresee there being anything significant. So it would be whatever's permitted right now on lots would probably be what's permitted in the future.
Can I speak to that for a second, Madeline?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just out of interest sake, I'm offering this simply because I just recently happened in our Ward 8. And some of you may know the house automatically that I'm referencing. If you're driving on the 4th or Mill Street in Tottenham out towards the Tenside Road, so past the No Frills, there's a backyard that that faces the road, and they built an ADU, and it is monstrous. Like, it dwarfs the original home. And I believe that subdivision wouldn't be deemed heritage. I think the boulevard is about 40 to 50 years old. But it's got that particular style of home, the side split and the back split that was very common in the subdivisions at that time. Long story short, as we were seeing this ADU get put up, and it was a full residential unit over a 3-car garage, I believe. And I do believe they've also used a breezeway to connect to the home. Madeline, are you smiling because you know exactly what home I'm talking about?
I believe
Yeah.
I do, yeah.
Okay. So it because of the high traffic along Mill Street there, so many people noticed it and have sort of watched the progress of that build, and began to reach out to me with either curiosity or complaint with regards to the same, Lainey, what you brought up. It was jarring in contrast to the home. So I said, well, let me ask. And Jennifer Best, our director of planning, she was really great in working with me. And what I discovered is that particular homeowner last summer, so July 2022-ish, they went to the Committee of Adjustment and asked for an exception to our zoning bylaw. And as the zoning bylaw at that time read, you were able to build, there wasn't the height restriction in the zoning was fairly generous. But at that time, the footprint of your ADU could not be larger than 60% of the existing footprint of the home on the property. And they went to Committee of Adjustment and won their application for exception. So they were able to build now a new ADU that was, in fact, by footprint, larger than the existing home on the property, on the lot. So there was still a little bit of gray or uncertainty as to why specifically the Committee of Adjustment allowed for that exception. That said, and this is where I'll wrap it up, what Jen and I talked about at length, which was really interesting, is it turns out when Bill 23 passed in November, there was quite a bit of leniency extended to some of the zoning parameters that municipalities were using in helping to restrict or inform the size and scale of what you were able to build as an ADU. So was there some foresight into the Committee of Adjustment saying, well, it's coming down the pipeline and by November, they're going to be able to build this regardless of whether or not the zoning allows it or not? Who knows which came first? But the show went on, they got the exception and they built the home. And although it is jarring still, that we're used to it in town because we're seeing it. But the other side of the argument is, this is what intensification looks like. So if we are working as a municipality to find a balance between sprawl and intensification, building up and having a bit of a libertarian approach to what people are allowed to do for additional dwelling units on their property, there's conversation around that where there never used to be. So I'll leave it at that. It's just interesting, and there are exceptions made, but based on that little bit of research I did and the conversations I had with municipal staff, it seems as though it won't just be a municipal level decision that's going to guide and enforce what residential owners are able to do with regards to scale on builds on their own property.
Mhm. And I can add to that because I do think it is pertinent to this committee. When we move forward, and I can come back to present about the draft guidelines, we will speak to ADUs. But just, I think everybody is aware that obviously older homes, especially heritage homes or homes that are built in the 1900s or whatnot within communities, have large lots. And so with the provincial direction, homes now are permitted as of right to have 3 additional dwelling units. So one can be in a separate detached building, and then the other 2 can be within the home footprint, and that includes attached garages, which I believe also was a component of that application. So if the committee feels strongly about a certain design direction to go in, because we can likely foresee, like many other communities across the province, that these heritage lots, even if some of them are designated, they do have the space for those detached accessory dwelling units. And so if there's specific direction, or even say, Josephine, your experience from another country on how we can better incorporate some of these uses into those mature neighborhoods, we would love to hear that kind of feedback, because we can anticipate, like Andrea had mentioned, that is how infill will probably take place, a component of it, at least in our community. And it's certainly provincial direction on how to solve the housing crisis is by providing some alternative housing options and sizes and that sort of thing. So it's something that we need to be prepared for, and our urban design guidelines can help speak to that. I will say that under some of the recent provincial legislation, there has been the removal of the application of urban design guidelines across communities. So we're working with our consultants on a legal way to ensure that we can still apply them.
All right, thank you very much, Madeline, and thank you to the committee for all your thoughts. This is still an ongoing consultation process, so there's lots of space if you think of something else afterwards to reach out. Madeline, anything else, or staff, anything else on this item before?
Nothing, just feel free to check out our project webpage. We have a lot of information on there that does deep dives into certain topics as well. And then follow along. And if you want to contribute just at any public information session, or send me an email directly with any feedback, happy to hear it. So thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you, Madeline. So can I get a motion to receive the presentation from Madeline Gibson? Thank you, Erica, and thank you, Chris. All right, correspondence and information items. While we didn't have anything formal, I did get a correspondence about the property that's on Yonge Street, the railroad track property, and I drove by it today, and it's not being maintained. So is this under new business? Gary, no? Okay. So my understanding was that is not our responsibility, but staff, you do have the contact person who we were in touch with about taking on, the railroad aspects of that property. Can you reach out to them and let them know that it needs to be maintained? That'd be great. Thank you. Does anybody else have any items that they want to bring forward? Okay. Item 4 on our agenda is unfinished business, St. John's United Church designation. We're going to get an update from staff. Vanessa, is this you? No?
That is
Okay.
me.
All right.
Hi. So, just to kind of recap, it's been a little bit of time, maybe since we've talked about this, but the St. John's United Church approached us about designation after some members attended our open house last year. And so we moved forward with the designation. Vanessa completed, I'd say, about 90%, 95% of the report. We got to the stage where we issued the NOID, and the NOID was the Notice of Intent to Designate. So you'll hear me use that term a few times. After we issued the NOID, an article was published in a local paper that drew attention to the designation. And unfortunately, this created controversy within the congregation because, as we are well familiar, there is still a lot of misinformation out there about designation. And sometimes, no matter how you try to explain that designation can be a positive thing, and that, at the town of New Tecumseth, we have never set out to be a restrictive heritage department, and that we work with the homeowners to protect the parts that are important to us, but not to enforce any unnecessary restrictions. No matter how many times you explain this to some people, they just don't believe it. So I think there is a lot of education that we can still do as a committee on the benefits of designation. But unfortunately, the church board opted to send in a formal objection to the process. A report went to council last night noting their objection, and unless council decides to proceed despite the objection, the designation will not move forward. And just to let you know, to this day, in my experience, 15 years of working with the committee, we have never gone against, proceeded with an objection, or gone against and designated a property with a formal objection. So it is likely that this is the end of this particular designation at this time. We do have the report fully complete, and the criteria is met. And so perhaps in the future, there'll be another board that would be interested in designation again. It would be very easy to restart the process. Council may decide to have the church invoiced for the cost of the NOID. So just so you know, the notice of intent to designate has to be issued usually in a newspaper that is widely spread in the community. And this particular ad cost us approximately $450, which is a large portion of our limited budget. We will not be invoicing for staff time, and that would be a significant sum of money. But what this situation has created is potentially more red tape for designations in the future, because the way senior management is looking at it, they're seeing a loss of funds for the town, and so a suggestion was made that perhaps when someone decides to designate their home, that there be a fee associated, similar to a planning application, or we are going to have to look into some, maybe legal sign-offs to say if we're starting the process, it's going to continue through to the end, to avoid anyone backing out in the middle or changing their mind. So naturally, these are all really important conversations to have. And tonight, I'm just bringing you the update. I'd like everyone to kind of think about this, take it away, and we will discuss further at the August meeting after we have the decision of what council has, or what council decides, and how we will move forward, whether we just stop the designation or proceed despite the objection. So I'd love for everyone to think a little bit about how moving forward we can protect the town's budget, protect our limited staff time, but also not dissuade people from designation, because we as this group know the benefits. And as we just heard in Madeline's presentation, without that Ontario Heritage Act protection, there's not a lot we can do. So sorry, I'm trying to keep my calm, but I have some thoughts about this. We're invested in this here.
Yeah.
But Vanessa, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just putting my hand up so I don't forget. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Sure.
I wanted to, and I had this idea now, and if I don't voice it, I'll forget at the end. But I know you mentioned the town's concern about the lost funds, but perhaps instead of associating a fee with it, which I think would turn people, it's just another reason why not to designate. Could we perhaps suggest a deposit where like you hold the $400 or whatever the cost is, and then reimburse it once it is officially designated?
Yeah, this is exactly the kind of conversation I'd like us to bring these ideas. That's a great idea of having a deposit. I'd like to have this bigger conversation at the next meeting once everybody's had a little bit of time to digest. But bringing ideas like that, so we can decide as a group what would be good moving forward to set us up for success, because we definitely have more homes to designate in the town, and we want to make it easy and comfortable for both the homeowner and the town. And this is just a really great learning experience for us to fine tune the system.
Right, thank you, Katie. I hear what you're saying, and that we're going to talk about this again in August. Were there any questions, the discussion, your ideas? Please write them down, hold on to them, and we'll circle back to this. But otherwise, are there any questions for Katie? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to item number 5, new business. Item 1 is the heritage update from staff. This is the Heritage Conference, Heritage Panels, and Jean's Walk. Thanks.
Thank you, Shira. I'll start with Heritage Panels. The museum had another panel, the Heritage History panels that we've been putting around town. The museum had 2 more that were installed. If you haven't had a chance to come by the museum, now's a really great time, because the Unity/Reflection Garden is looking amazing. Jen and her crew have been doing such a great job, and those plants are getting tall, and the flower colors are starting to come out and really shine through, and they're blooming, and it's just really beautiful. Anyways, the land acknowledgement panel with the explanation of the grant money that we received for this project is installed, and it's Duolingo and or bilingual, and we've got a QR code that leads you to our Indigenous history in Tecumseh document. So it's really a nice sight to see. I suggest and recommend coming by. We also got a panel installed describing our horse trough and jail cell on the property. So we've got a nice little enjoyable trail going on. The panel for the Beaton Town Hall was also finally installed. Also recommend going to check that out. And I'm going to just quickly plug, we've got a traveling exhibit at the museum right now on the Cree language. It's from the Canadian Language Museum, and we've got it until July 3rd. So if you're interested in coming to see that, I suggest coming by as well. I spent some time on Wednesday with Madeline and some of the planners in the town. In the evening, we did a Jane's Walk pretty much in the parameters of the Beaton Heritage Conservation District. I spoke to a lot of the built heritage and the properties and a little bit of their history. And we walked through the town, and then Madeline spoke to the HCD side of things that we kind of went over today a little bit. And it was well attended. The tickets were free. We had about 40 or so people show up. It was great, and kind of invigorated me into wanting to do more of these tours. So that was fun. And then I took off on Thursday to London, where the Community Heritage Ontario Conference was taking place at one of the hotels there downtown. And I attended some interesting sessions. London, it's a nice mix of both of my worlds, because London is also now designated under UNESCO as Music City. So they have a specific focus on music and architectural relation to music as well. So on Saturday, I did a walking tour, which was sort of like a Jane's Walk, with a couple of the organizers, and we did a lot of the buildings downtown that related to the music scene, and of course some beautifully constructed religious buildings like churches. And then we made our way over to 100 Kellogg, and this is the old Kellogg's factory, where cornflakes, Fruit Loops, all the cereals were made. And Madeline touched on adaptive reuse slightly. This was probably one of the best, if not the best, example of adaptive reuse that I've seen. It was so cool. This building is massive. I can't even put a square footage to it. I don't know it, but it's huge. One whole section of it is multi-level, multi-room. It's like an indoor Palladium. It's called The Factory. It's like a Palladium meets Dave and Buster's meets Rec Room. It's very family oriented, but it's also very corporation. It's oriented to anybody that needs to just get out for some fun. Any age group is welcome there. And I thought it was an incredible use of the space, but the building is massive. So there's a whole other section that's literally office space, different levels, different tenants there. They have a conference hall. They have a promenade where there's a barber shop, there's a Starbucks, there's other businesses. They use some space for art. So one of my good friends actually has an art piece on display there. So they have a whole art gallery. And they have an immersive Disney exhibit. So there's just a lot going on in this building. It was fairly overwhelming. Then we made our way outside, and there's a brewing company. So there's a brew house and a distillery behind there. And there's just some really great attachments happening to the building. Like the Hard Rock Cafe is actually opening up a hotel. So we got to see the stages right now of it being built. So part of the old Kellogg building is being readapted into a hotel as well. So that was probably one of the highlights of the conference, because I can talk about it because it was pretty cool. So there is a lot of opportunity for adaptive reuse with some of our heritage buildings and buildings that aren't really finding much purpose. Yeah, I think that's where I could leave it for the update. We had some really good sessions, really good talk on Indigenous relations and UNDRIP in Government of Canada, implementing it into law. I think in 2021, Josephine, you can correct me on that. And there was a session on engaging the youth. It didn't really go in the direction that I thought it was going in, but it did restore a little bit of hope for me that there is a younger generation that is just as eager, if not more eager, about preserving and maintaining and including. So just a lot of talk on inclusion and diversity as well. And I'll leave it at that if there's any questions.
Are there any questions for Vanessa? Not seeing any. Thank you very much, Vanessa. Sounds like it was a very lovely tour.
It was, and London was a really nice city to visit, so
Yeah.
that was a nice chance and privilege.
All right, item 5.2 is the registered significant list, and this is in regards to the Tottenham Water Tower.
Yes, so the Tottenham Water Tower we've had a request to put it on the significant property list. Some of the people that were on committee last term may be familiar with the water tower. Back in about 2017, there was an engineering report that said structurally there are some issues with the water tower, and that we need to make a decision on to restore, to demolish, or there's kind of like a third in between, which would be kind of to fix it up to safety standards, but not do a full restoration. I believe from the original report, demolition was recommended. However, the Heritage Committee acted and stepped in and said that we would like some time to look into some options. So we sought out several granting opportunities, but there was nothing we could find that would match what we needed for the water tower. We also issued an expression of interest to see if anyone would be interested in sponsorship funding, using the water tower, preserving it, but also perhaps using it as advertising for a corporation or something. Unfortunately, there were no offers there. So right now, as it stands, I believe it is kind of back at the table. New costing will have to be sought out to decide, and then council will have to decide again what to do moving forward with it. But still at this time, we can, if the committee is in favor, add it to the significant property list. It is a significant landmark in Tottenham and means a lot to a lot of people. And by adding it to the list, we are demonstrating that there is the desire to protect it in any sort of way. We're not looking at designation at this point, but adding it to the significant list, still keeps it at the front of everyone's mind. And hopefully, we can move forward and find a solution that works for everybody. So how does the committee feel? Oh, sorry, Councillor Jax.
I just wanted to say thank you, Katie. I really appreciate the update, and I am in possession of that report. And I do feel a call to action to do something with it. And shamefully, I have done nothing since our last meeting, but okay. I will. May I, per your recommendation, may I put a motion on the floor that we do add the Tottenham Water Tower to the significant list? Can I get someone to second it? Thanks, Chris.
All right, so we have a motion to add it to the significant list. Was that correct? All right, so you know that the significant list now has no clout with the updates in Bill 23. So everything that goes on the bill on the significant list has to either come off the significant list as of now or be designated for it to, like, we have until when, Katie?
2025.
2020. Okay, so that's significant.
Yes, so we do have some time for something to happen with it. Yes.
All right, good. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so can I get a show of hands to see? Oh, sorry, Vanessa, go ahead.
2 years is really not that much time.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Designation takes a year and it takes months to research, and there's one person that does it.
Okay, and that's you, right? All right, so do we have any discussion about this motion now that it's on the floor to add the water tower to the significant list?
I guess I will add my voice to that because I do live in Tottenham. I'm new to Tottenham, so I can certainly appreciate that some residents have grown attached to it. I personally think it's a monstrosity and I don't understand the attachment to it, but I'm happy that people love it and good for them, and I'm happy to abstain.
Yes, I mean, there are two sides to this, and for sure that's one of the sides is people don't recognize or see, some people don't see, what's the big deal, just take it down. Ontario is like different from England. Ontario does not have a very great history of preserving old our heritage, or all of Toronto, for example, was torn down, and so for Tottenham, this is a significant part of their history, and industrial architecture specifically doesn't exist much around anymore. I often see in old movies, shots of the water tower. It's iconic in some ways. And if it was fixed up, I think it would be much nicer. And maybe more people, if it wasn't painted that lovely blue, maybe something a little bit nicer and less rusty, maybe it would have more, maybe it would be more appealing to more people. We've tried to get some interest in repurposing it, reusing it, turning it into advertising, but there was nobody interested in doing that, unfortunately. Myself, I definitely see it as something that is iconic. When you're at the Tottenham Conservation Area, you can look and see it, like it's in the background, and that has meaning for me. It's it says Tottenham on it, and while it doesn't have a purpose, it's still it's a good reminder of our past, and I don't know, I like it. Chris, go ahead. Oh, we can't hear you, Chris.
But I'm talking.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to throw in, I'm actually next month 2 years in Tottenham, and it was actually one of the things that really made my partner and I, when we came to town, go, oh, look at that. And yes, the color of it is hideous. However, it is one of those things that I think people recognize Tottenham by. And I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out there, that I agree that if something can be done to it, even if it's some sort of nature garden underneath it, like make it more than just a water tower. Excuse me. A water tower, make it something more to bring community into there, right? Like whether it be some sort of perennial garden or something that's going to bring another part of the community to that location as well, maybe. Multi-purpose. Anyways, that's all I got.
Sorry, Vanessa G, go ahead. We can't hear you.
You're muted too.
Thank you. I was just saying, maybe kind of going off what you said, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but with your idea, Chris, about kind of making it more of a community-based thing, I think one of the biggest challenges with that is its actual location. Like there's no parking, and it's right in the middle of like where a bunch of houses surround it. So I don't know how there would be access to create that kind of thing unless the people who can access it via walking. That's just a tough area. And I'd be really curious I'm one of the people, I can literally see it out my window. But I'm really curious about those like 5 or 6 houses that literally live at the base of it, what they would feel about, any other potential, even though I think it's a great idea. I just see there's, a lot of challenges there, but I'm going off of that, besides our discussion amongst our committee, and the notice of interest or whatever it was called that we put out last year, Shira, about trying to make it an advertisement thing, have we tried to talk, maybe unofficially, but tried to talk to the community about what they feel or how many people are really attached to it versus the opposite opinion?
No, there's never been a formal survey or anything put out. No. I mean, maybe that's, I mean, I think that Councillor Jacks would probably agree with me. Public consultation is a key. So I think that's a fabulous idea, for sure.
I'll just
And I'm
add to
thinking
that.
specifically those like 4
Yeah.
or 5 properties that like share that little driveway space, right?
Yeah.
And I have spoke to those residents specifically. So I won't, it's just anecdotal at this point, but just to say there is, I think safety is their priority right now, you know, and not to be dramatic or unrealistic, but they're like, we would just like to know it's not going to collapse, you know, like that's really the priority. And to be honest, the perception that I got, again, anecdotally, based on the conversations I had, is they're much more interested in something that is innovative, whether and perhaps as part of a tie into a multimodal transportation system. So this could be something like the Glimmer Gardens at the other end of Tottenham that is only walkable and accessed by foot or bike. They're open to that more so than taking it down, because by taking it down, it lends itself then to many more intrusive possibilities of what would get done, what could be used, that land could be used for, because so much of that frontage that you're speaking about, Vanessa, and it's very awkward, a very awkward layout, but so much of that frontage is right of way. So if the tower came down and, for the sake of this conversation, that land got sold, not that I think the town's going to sell the land, but you know what I mean, then there's a lot more vulnerability of the unknown, versus if there was a perennial garden that you could access, or a little, you know, a little water feature under the water tower that just became lovely to sit around, whatever. I think it sounded to me like there was more of an appetite for that. And I'll just leave it at that, because I don't have the data. I've just had a few chit chats.
All right, so let's, all right. I was going to say, let's go back to the motion and speak to the motion rather than speak to the future. So Josephine?
Recommend something, if I may. And that is that if we're in Treaty 18 territory, and it would be really nice for that to be potentially used as some reconciliation and review of that, there may be funding under reconciliation under the Government of Canada to do something about it. So I certainly now agree that putting it on the motion is appropriate, having listened to all the comments, especially the history of it. So I appreciate that, and thank you.
And I saw Erica, you had your hand up as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I like all the ideas going around, going back to the, I specifically went to Sustainable Giant Public Art Program, but that's an aside. I think my understanding, I just want to understand, we're voting today to put it on the list so that we have the time and have the protection to make a longer term decision. So all these side conversations are to kind of go in that direction, because I think it would be, I think community consultation is important, both for the residents there, as well as the fact that this is a town-owned property, and the fact that this is going to be an expensive project, to make sure that we are able to do this responsibly and make sure that we're putting, you know, our heritage dollars into where it matters most. I'm not saying this is not it, but making sure that we understand that. And I'd love to see some kind of proposal for plans as to what we would do with it. And I know there's a lot of good ideas around the committee, but if we're going to own it long-term and have the, you know, advocate for the town to really take care of this. And I agree, it's iconic when you come into it, you know, it's Tottenham. But making sure that we are thinking really long-term with it, knowing that any heritage building is going to maintain, especially something as unique as a water tower. It's not just, you know, your average fixes. So I'd be curious to see not just the heritage aspect and, you know, keeping it up, but, you know, a long-term purpose for it. Which it sounds like there's a lot of great ideas just at this table, and I'm sure the community has even more.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for your insightful and, you know, your thoughts and your comments. So we have a motion on the floor that the water tower be added to the significant list. Can I see a show of hands? All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, okay, everyone. Okay. Sorry about that. I can The motion is passed. All right. Now let's go back. Heritage Advisory Committee terms of reference review. Ms. Carrie?
That's me again.
That's you. Okay.
So this kind of relates back to something that is on our summary report. At the last meeting, we talked about how the terms of reference is very focused on built heritage, which is, of course, the mandate of the committee and our primary focus. However, at the last committee meeting, we talked about our desire to increase the cultural heritage aspect and to bring awareness to the cultural diversity and the cultural events that are taking place in our community. So, under the terms of reference, they're to advise and make recommendations to council on heritage matters, policy for heritage, research for heritage, and liaising between council and other community groups. But out of that discussion, we wondered, do we want to propose adding one line to encompass the cultural heritage aspect? And, kind of touching back to the outreach and the education component, that is another thing that has another theme that has been coming up in our discussions of late, that maybe we add a line to say something along the lines of that this committee also is to support and provide outreach and education on cultural heritage matters in the community. If you thought that that would be a worthy addition for us to put some focus to, because as we know, there are some restrictions with the recent amendments that will, oh, thanks, Carrie. With the recent amendments to say Bill 23 and whatnot, designations will prove to be a little bit more difficult, but this group can still do a lot of great work in the community, in addition to built heritage and supporting our cultural heritage as well. So I'd be curious to hear what people's thoughts are, please.
I can go. I think that's great. I think that, we're here to promote our built heritage in that it tells a story about our cultural heritage. And just an old building without a story isn't really quite the same. So I think that's fantastic, and I'd be happy to support that.
Anyone else have any thoughts? It looks like everyone agrees with, at least agrees with Katie and agrees with Erica that absolutely this seems like a good idea, and why didn't we think of it sooner? Oh, sorry, Katie, I can see your lips moving.
Sorry, now I'm on mute. Yes. Okay. Well, I'm glad that it just seemed to be a kind of a common theme that has been coming up since we started this committee and through discussions in the last. So, I think it will be really, really great. And for all the committee members, that have wonderful connections in our community, if, there is a community group that is promoting their cultural heritage, please have them touch base with Vanessa and I in the culture department, because we want to support the community groups any way we can, and we'll certainly, bring important things to this committee and keep everyone informed. Just as an example in this kind of realm, the Ethnic Mosaic Alliance is going to be hosting a Persian festival in Riverdale Park in August that we're really excited for at the museum, because it'll be taking place like right out on the grounds. And so they're going to be, celebrating Persian heritage through dance and food and music and film. So, you know, while built heritage will stay our primary focus, we can really branch out and support heritage in many different forms.
Excellent. Now, Katie, you don't need a motion from us because these terms of reference will go to council to be approved.
That's right. Yes, we'll
Just
we'll
looking
put
for
the line
feedback.
in. Yes, exactly. If everybody's comfortable, it'll go forward. And when Carrie sends out the agenda for review. Oh, sorry, Carrie, I see you.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but maybe we could work together on creating the amendment to the terms, and I will
course.
circulate it to the members before I
Wonderful.
put it onto the summary report before it goes to council. Is that okay with
Thank you.
everybody?
Sounds great. All right. Thank you very much, Katie and Carrie. Item 4, open house registered significant list. Vanessa.
Thank you. Okay, so we just want to talk about how our approach to the significant list properties. I think it was at our last meeting, we discussed potentially hosting another open house like the one that we did last August, and send out letters or invitations rather to the 32 properties that are on our list and have them come to the museum for a presentation. And then just after the appeal or the objection, sorry, from St. John's United Church, a reframe of the idea kind of came into our heads, and we're thinking more along the lines of writing out a very detailed, very descriptive letter to all of the property owners on the significant list, explaining Bill 23 and all the changes that have been made and what this means for the significant list properties. And then a little bit more discussion about designation. So just make it more of a very informative document, and then give them the option to decide whether they would like to learn more information or if they want us to have a meeting, sort of like a survey at the same time. Like Katie mentioned, we've never done a designation against a property owner's will. And when we had the open house in August, we had we had mailed out 200 invitations, and we had about 27 in attendance. So I just feel that an open house for the 32 properties might not be the best use of our time. So just to take the open house from a physical in-person kind of experience more to a written experience. And this also to open up our thinking to cultural landscapes and heritage conservation districts. One of the, as I mentioned, a designation takes a long time because there's a lot of time period constraints that the OHA has enacted in order for there to be a proper appeal time and a proper amount of time for community members to really understand either the NOID or whether or not they think it's a good idea, et cetera, et cetera. So looking into designating bigger spaces where a lot of the properties can be involved is an option. And right now, getting 32 designations done in 2 years is not going to happen unless we hire outside sources, and unless they all want to designate, because a big appeal to getting onto the designation list, or sorry, the significant list, was that you didn't have the ties of the law from designation standpoint. So as has been mentioned, every single property on the designated, or sorry, again, every single property on the significant list as of January 1st, 2023 has a 2-year lifespan. So January 1st, 2025, any property that has not been designated will have to come off the list and will not be allowed to go back onto the list for 5 years. And it is my understanding that if the property is not on the significant list, it cannot be designated. So it does need to be on the significant list in order to proceed with designation. And sorry, Carrie, I see your message, but these letters, the previous letter that we had discussed would have been more of an invitation to an open house to learn about designation and to possibly go forward with designation. These letters that we're proposing are instead of an open house, and to provide all of the written information that's going to be necessary and all of the contact information, like myself or Katie. Questions can be asked to the Heritage Committee. We need to get an idea of who's opting for designation or wanting to opt for that. And we need to just continue to do our outreach and education. So I'd be more inclined to host, or we'd be more inclined to host learning sessions throughout the town. We can travel throughout the town if people are interested in learning about designation. Yeah, so I can ramble on, so I'll stop. And if you guys have any questions, comments, ideas.
Chris, go ahead.
My question, Vanessa, is if a property that's on the significant list, as long as they get the process started to become designated by 2025, even if it takes longer for the actual designation to happen, it's still within.
Yeah, once council passes the motion to proceed with designation, we are in the timeline to designate. So yeah.
Anybody have any questions or any comments about the proposed letter? Go ahead, Erica.
Thank you. I'm just concerned with like a lot of text. Are people really, I see your point, and I'm with you on keeping your time in consideration, considering how much was lost with the last designation process. But I'm concerned about, sending out these letters and being this long amount of information and people go, I don't want to read that. And then that's more of your time not fully utilized. Has there been any, so there's 32 properties on the list, and about reaching out to the property down, kind of looking at which properties are either, most at risk, which ones we would want to be designated the most, and kind of going down the list and reaching out to those property owners to see if they'd be willing to have a meeting or that one-to-one interaction. So you can still have a document with the information for them to take away, but you're not just sending them a letter that they may or may not read that you put a lot of effort into. Just to kind of have that mix of, I see you're concerned with the open house. Those are kind of hit and miss, but having that one-to-one interaction, having that in person, but still having that backup documentation, and then not just sending it into the void and hoping that somebody responds.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I want to support, Erica, what you just said, because when we did the Heritage Conservation District, we did send out, like, the letters were hand delivered to every house, and we still had people saying, what letter?
Right.
So it totally goes to what you said, which is the individual contact. And now, as far as the suggestion about having a hit list of like the top places to go after, is that something that you guys feel comfortable going, that that you have priorities identified, or is that something that you want to bring to the committee to identify?
I'd say both. We definitely have a couple properties that are for sure to us that we would love to have designated to ensure its longevity. But we're also open to the committee looking and choosing and picking.
Okay, so that seems to me like that's an item to go onto our next agenda then.
Sure.
Is to, have that list of significant places, and I guess maybe something from you guys that identifies the ones that are top of mind for you, most at risk, most significant, however, like whatever rationale you have. And then the committee can look over and identify from their perspective which places they also believe are important. Yes, Chris, go ahead.
Not to throw things out there to complicate anything, but are there any incentives from the municipality for people to designate?
At this point in the game, not so much. We are,
Was anyone on here part of the meeting with the group that was thrown out a couple weeks ago? The
there's
one that,
thrown out.
Yeah.
I'll forget what it was called now. I wish I should have looked it up before. It was the man that was talking about heritage in Toronto. He's like a big wig down there. No, give me some time, I'll find it.
That was in our town?
No, it was something that was given to us, I think by Carrie, I want to say. You gave it out, send it out to us if we were interested. Tom, something like that, maybe.
Yes, the gentleman that hosted the information session.
Thank you.
Yes, I didn't attend, so I don't know if anyone else did attend.
Did anybody else?
I don't even know what this is. Can I get a little bit more background?
Let me find the email. It's coming back to me, Chris. Thanks.
I know
Sorry,
exactly
just
what you're
because while
talking
I was
about. Yeah.
while I was listening to it, it went for almost 3.5 hours. It was interesting that Toronto gives the option for people who have homes of significance to go and actually get a tax break on their property tax to incentivize people to designate their homes. And it was really interesting. And he said something, it ranged anywhere between 20 to 60% or something of their taxes. So I don't know, just throwing it out there.
The gentleman's name was Kevin Jacob.
Oh,
And I
thank you.
just resent the email that he sent me with regards to the information session that was held. I think it was the beginning of June, if I'm not mistaken.
It was very interesting. He's been taking part and looking after heritage in Toronto for his entire career. It was very interesting.
This is definitely something that's come forward before. And I think it was looked at as far as, I mean, staff, you can speak to this more specifically if you have the specifics, but I believe that under the CIP grant, the Heritage Conservation District was included as the possibility of having some support for homes within the HCD to apply for some financial support with some of their upgrades. Hearing that Toronto is able to reduce people's taxes who have designated their homes, I'm encouraged by that. You know, I've heard of that happening in the States, but I haven't heard about it happening up here so much. Obviously, it's not something that I can speak to on council as somebody with a designated home. But I know that it is something that is done other places. I didn't know that it was done here though.
There's a comment that we got a lot in the process of designating. A lot of people said to us, "Oh, your taxes are going to go up." That's a myth that we've dealt with over and over. We've had to tell so many people, like, that's not a thing. They're not going to go down at this point, which is fine. We sought to designate our property to protect, you know, our investment here. But there is a lot of misconception in the community that taxes could go up. So even just clarifying that they'd stay the same at this point, I think would be helpful. But I do wonder, in prioritizing the people that showed up to that open house that we had, there's obviously some interest amongst those people, either for or against, right? They're either at that meeting because they're interested in one way or the other. But overwhelmingly, that was a very positive open house. It was very respectful. There was a lot of really great conversation and great questions. So I would wonder about, you know, it's unfortunate timing, because I feel like that open house was very much like, hey, you don't have to designate your property, just go on the significant list for now. You know, it was kind of like the happy medium thing. And now that's completely changed. So there's definitely misinformation now, just with those changes and that bill, that we need to clarify, obviously with a bit of haste, because Vanessa's running out of time.
All right, so any other comments about the I think that staff, do you guys concur with the path forward? Putting it on the next agenda and having some, yeah, okay. Anybody have anything else they want to add to that? No, okay, wonderful. Oh, yes, Vanessa G.
Sorry. So I know Chris kind of asked this earlier, but I just wanted to confirm. So as long as the process to designate has started before 2025, I know Vanessa, you said that essentially protects the property. So prior, when we were talking about the water tower, you mentioned that the process to designate obviously takes at least a year, if not a little bit more. What would it look like? I'm kind of fast forwarding, depending on what we decide on this open house or letters or what interest we do have. Would there be a way to essentially start, if the interest is there, start multiple designations prior to 2025 instead of completing one or maybe two? Like, would there be a way for you to organize and essentially officially start those and then take the next X number of years to finish the research?
Yeah,
Okay.
short answer.
Okay, no, that's fine. As long as we all know that, right? Like, it's an option. So we're not
lot of-
like limited to one property or whatever the case may be.
So, because there's the requirements for the properties that are on the the significant list, there already has to be a little bit of research that's been done. So we at least have the criteria that's met. In some cases, actually, now I don't know if there are any properties on our significant list that wouldn't meet all the criteria, because now you need to have 2 specific criteria instead of 1. I think we're good though, but the statements of cultural interest and value that go along with the significant properties will already have enough research to at least get the NOID out, and you can work on the research paper in between. Like fill in the meat, you know?
All right, that's it. That's clear. Thank you very much. All right, anything else? Not seeing any. We're going to move on to item number 5.5, which is PD, professional development.
Okay, this is just a quick one to end. We were contacted by a heritage outreach consultant who has been offering around Ontario different professional development opportunities for municipal heritage committees. And he'd like to offer one in South Simcoe, and reached out to our heritage committee first to see if we would like to host. Now, Chris, it would be interesting, to hear a little bit more about the one that you attended through Innisfil. But this would be a 4-hour session that would include presentations on what is cultural heritage value, roles and best practices of heritage committees, and inventory evaluation and designation of properties, which includes amendments to the OHA as set out by Bill 108 and Bill 23. There is a $300 fee for the workshop that would be divided up amongst however many participants attend from other municipalities, and then each municipality would be charged based on how many people attend the workshop. If our group is interested in this kind of professional development, I can offer the museum as a venue to host this. But it's really just, I'm bringing it to the committee to see if you have any interest in pursuing this, or if not.
Andrea, go ahead.
Thank you, Katie. Quick question. Are we flexible with because we would host? Do we get to call the shots on date, or is there something proposed?
Yeah, he seems, very flexible. So I imagine, being the host, we would be able to select. He said, it could be a weekend, an evening, whichever. He seems very flexible.
My only suggestion, and it sounds intriguing, I was loving a learning opportunity. I just would recommend that we look at it after Labor Day weekend. So.
Erica, go ahead.
I'll just say, I think that, for $300 divided amongst however many people come, I think that's a great price for a professional development opportunity. Can I ask who the person is hosting?
Yeah, sure. It's Bert Duclos.
I knew it.
Yeah. So he's had over 30 years in the private sector and over 19 in the cultural heritage community. Actually worked for the Ministry of Culture. So kind of an inside scoop.
He's a King Township resident. So as the Heritage and Cultural Supervisor for King, I know Bert. He's fantastic.
Okay.
I will advocate that it is a really good, I did pre-COVID, I did two. He did two hour sessions in an evening in King pre-COVID. He would definitely be an expert. He's been in our archives teaching our heritage planner how to do the work that Vanessa's doing. So he's been an asset there. So I will advocate that it's a great presentation. Bert is extremely knowledgeable. So I think that that's great. If it's possible to take advantage of that, that'd be something I'd be interested in. I've already seen part of his presentation and I'd want to have a refresh with all the current changes.
Well, that sounds like some pretty good endorsement right there. So, I have to agree, $300 is not very much, especially if we have other heritage committees that go in. We don't have a very big heritage conservation budget, and it's, but this seems like a great, especially because it's a newer committee. I know there's some people on here who already know a lot of this stuff, but Erica, who, does this for a living, is still interested, then it makes me intrigued. So, I would suggest that, unless anybody has any opposition, I would suggest that we move forward with this. And to Councillor Jack's recommendation of after Labor Day, I think that's, most people are probably already pretty full up for the summer. Does that sound correct? Yeah, everyone's nodding their head. Yeah, we're done. So yeah, let's see if we can plan something for September.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, so we have, last item is items for the next agenda. We already have our review that we're going to be having. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to put onto the agenda for next? Oh, Katie.
Yes, so something that has come up is we are going to develop a policy for our notice of intent to designate. So right now there's a bit of a gray area in the Ontario Heritage Act about issuing the NOID in the newspaper. But as we explained earlier, there's such a huge cost associated with this. Some municipalities they've interpreted the Heritage Act to say, as long as it's widespread through the community, maybe through the town website, if the notice was on the town website, that would be the same as publishing it in a newspaper that would go through the community. So I'm hoping to consult with legal, get a little bit of their expert opinion, because the ministry is actually kind of divided. One person telling us that, no, it has to be a newspaper, and another person saying, no, it can clearly be something widespread like a website. So we would like to delve into this a little further and then bring a policy to the committee for the August meeting, so that we could, if we can do it on the website, that would be a massive amount of savings for us, especially if we're going to move forward and say, designate, 15 properties. A rough $500 per NOID will certainly add up.
That's very optimistic that we're going to be designating 15 properties. I like it. I like your optimism. You're going to be looking at other municipalities when you do this as well to see what other municipalities are doing around us. And
Yes, definitely.
perfect. All right. Well, that will be on our next agenda, and we'll have a chance to review it then. Andrea?
Very quickly, I will 100% pursue through town staff the feasibility of getting an update to the options that were presented in 2017 for the water tower. And just find out, even by process, what's involved with getting some update to that, and then just come back and inform the group.
All right, so that's another item for the agenda. So the water tower update from Councillor Jacks. Anyone else? Oh, go ahead, Josephine.
One other thing that I would add is maybe to also add further discussion about the incentives for designation, to follow on from what we discussed today, because I think that is a really important way to get people to be more interested in it.
Thank you. Okay, that sounds great. Okay. Well, if something occurs to you in the middle of the night, write it down, send an email, and we'll add it onto the agenda. Otherwise, have a great summer. I'll see you guys in August. Enjoy this lovely weather, and thank you everyone for your time. And thank you to staff.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you.